Good morning, boys and girls. We're going to continue reading. We're starting on page 246. And we're going to answer number 11 right now because really it was from yesterday's reading. So when did Dwight D. Eisenhower give a speech? It's a very famous speech. You could find it online, but it was on D-Day. So you just write D with a dash and then day. And if you want to find it in your Anne Frank book, it is the beginning of 244. All right, so we're going to answer number 12 today, 13, and 14. Let's get into it.
Friday, 9 June 1944. Dear Kitty, super news of the invasion. The Allies have taken Bayeux, a small village on the French coast, and are now fighting for Caen. It's obvious that they intend to cut off the peninsula where Cherbourg lies. Every evening, war correspondents give news from the battlefront, telling us of the difficulties, courage, and enthusiasm of the army. They manage to get hold of the most incredible stories. Also, some of the wounded who are already back in England again came to the microphone. The Air Force is up all the time in spite of the miserable weather. We heard over the BBC that Churchill wanted to land with the troops on D-Day. However, Eisenhower and the other generals managed to get him out of the idea. Just think of it. What pluck he has for such an old man. He must be 70 at least. The excitement here has worn off a bit. Still, we're hoping that the war will be over at the end of this year. It'll be about time, too. Mrs. Von Don's grizzling is absolutely unbearable. Now she can't any longer drive us crazy over the invasion. She nags us the whole day long about the bad weather. It really would be nice to dump her in a bucket of cold water and put her up in the loft. The whole of the secret annex, except Von Don and Pater, have read the trilogy Hungarian Rhapsody. This book deals with the life history of the composer, virtuoso, and child prodigy Franz Liszt. It is a very interesting book, but in my opinion there is a bit too much about women in it. In his time, Liszt was not only the greatest and most famous pianist, but also the greatest ladies' man, right up to the age of 70. He lived with the Duchess Marie de Gould, Princess Caroline Wittgenstein, the dancer Lola Montez, the pianist Agnes Kingworth, the pianist Sophie Mentor, the Princess Olga Janina, Baroness Olga Meyendorff, the actress Lila What's-Her-Name, etc., etc. It is just endless. The parts of the book that deal with music and art are much more interesting. Among those mentioned are Schumann, Clara Wieck, Hector Berlioz, Johannes Brahms, Beethoven, Joachim, Richard Wagner, Hans von Bülow, Anton Rubinstein, Frédéric Chopin, Victor Hugo, Honoré de Balzac, Hiller, Hummel, Czerny, Rossini, Cherubini, Paganini, Mendelssohn, etc., etc. Liszt was personally a fine man, very generous, and modest about himself, though exceptionally vain. He helped everyone. His art was everything to him. He was mad about cognac and about women, could not bear to see tears, was a gentleman, would never refuse to do anyone a favor, didn't care about money, loved religious liberty and world freedom. Yours, Anna. Tuesday, 13 June 1944. Dear Kitty, another birthday has gone by, so now I'm 15. I received quite a lot of presents. All 5 parts of Sprenger's History of Art, a set of underwear, a handkerchief, 2 bottles of yogurt, a pot of jam, a spiced gingerbread cake, and a book on botany from Mummy and Daddy, a double bracelet from Margot, a book from the Von Dons, sweet peas from Dussel, sweets and exercise books from Yep and Ellie, and the high spot of all, the book Maria Theresa, and 3 slices of full cream cheese from Crawler. A lovely bunch of peonies from Pater. The poor boy took a lot of trouble to try and find something, but didn't have any luck. There's still excellent news of the invasion, in spite of the wretched weather, countless gales, heavy rains, and high seas. Yesterday, Churchill, Smuts, Eisenhower, and Arnold visited French villages which have been conquered and liberated. The torpedo boat that Churchill was in shelled the coast. He appears like so many men not to know what fear is. Makes me envious. It's difficult for us to judge from our secret redoubt how people outside have reacted to the news. Undoubtedly, people are pleased that the idle English have rolled up their sleeves and are doing something at last. Any Dutch people who still look down on the English, scoff at England and her government of old gentlemen, call the English cowards, and yet hate the Germans, deserve a good shaking. Perhaps it would put some sense into their woolly brains. I hadn't had a period for over 2 months, but it finally started again on Saturday. Still, in spite of all the unpleasantness and bother, I'm glad it hasn't failed me any longer. Yours, Anna. Wednesday, 14 June 1944. Dear Kitty, my head is haunted by so many wishes and thoughts, accusations and reproaches. I'm really not as conceited as so many people seem to think. I know my own faults and shortcomings better than anyone. But the difference is that I also know that I want to improve, shall improve, and have already improved a great deal. Why is it, then, I so often ask myself that everyone still thinks I'm so terribly knowing and forward? Am I so knowing? Is it that I really am, or maybe the others aren't? That sounds queer, I realize now, but I shan't cross out the last sentence because it really isn't so crazy. Everyone knows that Mrs. Von Don, one of my chief accusers, is unintelligent. I might as well put it plainly and say stupid. Stupid people usually can't take it if others do better than they do. Mrs. Von Don thinks I'm stupid because I'm not quite so lacking in intelligence as she is. She thinks I'm forward because she's even more so. She thinks my dresses are too short because hers are even shorter. And that's also the reason that she thinks I'm knowing, because she's twice as bad about joining in over subjects she knows absolutely nothing about. But one of my favorite sayings is, there's no smoke without fire, and I readily admit that I'm knowing. Now, the trying part about me is that I criticize and scold myself far more than anyone else does. Then if Mummy adds her bit of advice, the pile of sermons becomes so insurmountable that, in my despair, I become rude and start contradicting, and then, of course, the old, well-known Anna watchword comes back. No one understands me. This phrase sticks in my mind. I know it sounds silly, yet there is some truth in it. I often accuse myself to such an extent that I simply long for a word of comfort, for someone who could give me some sound advice, and also draw out some of my real self. But alas, I keep on looking, but I haven't found anyone yet. I know that you'll immediately think of Peter, won't you, kid? It's like this. Peter loves me not as a lover, but as a friend, and grows more affectionate every day. But what is the mysterious something that holds us both back? I don't understand it myself. Sometimes I think that my terrible longing for him was exaggerated. Yet that's really not it, because if I don't go up to see him for 2 days, then I long for him more desperately than ever before. Peter is good, and he's a darling, but still there's no denying that there's a lot about him that disappoints me. Especially his dislike of religion, and all his talk about food and various other things don't appeal to me. Yet I feel quite convinced that we shall never quarrel now that we've made that straightforward agreement together. Pate is a peace-loving person. He's tolerant and gives in very easily. He lets me say a lot of things to him that he would never accept from his mother. He tries most persistently to keep his things in order. And yet why should he keep his innermost self to himself? And why am I never allowed there? By nature he is more closed up than I am, I agree, but I know, and from my own experience, that at some time or other even the most uncommunicative people long just as much, if not more, to find someone in whom they can confide. Both Pedro and I have spent our most meditative years in the secret annex. We often discuss the future, the past, and the present, but as I've already said, I still seem to miss the real thing, and yet I know that it's there. Yours, Anna. Thursday, 15 June 1944. Dear Kitty, I wonder if it's because I haven't been able to poke my nose outdoors for so long that I've grown so crazy about everything to do with nature. I can perfectly well remember that there was a time when a deep blue sky, the song of the birds, moonlight, and flowers could never have kept me spellbound. That's changed since I've been here. At Whitsun, for instance, when it was so warm, I stayed awake on purpose until 11:30 one evening in order to have a good look at the moon for once by myself. Alas, the sacrifice was all in vain, as the moon gave far too much light and I didn't dare risk opening a window. Another time, some months ago now, I happened to be upstairs one evening when the window was open. I didn't go downstairs until the window had to be shut. The dark, rainy evening, the gale, the scudding clouds held me entirely in their power. It was the first time in a year and a half that I'd seen the night face to face. After that evening, my longing to see it again was greater than my fear of burglars, rats, and raids on the house. I went downstairs all by myself and looked outside through the windows in the kitchen and the private office. A lot of people are fond of nature. Many sleep outdoors occasionally, and people in prisons and hospitals long for the day when they will be free to enjoy the beauties of nature. But few are so shut away and isolated from that which can be shared alike by rich and poor. It's not imagination on my part when I say that to look up at the sky, the clouds, the moon, and the stars makes me calm and patient. It's a better medicine than either valerian or bromine. Mother Nature makes me humble and prepared to face every blow courageously. Alas, it has had to be that I am only able, except on a few rare occasions, to look at nature through dirty net curtains hanging before very dusty windows. And it's no pleasure looking through these any longer, because nature is just the one thing that really must be unadulterated. Yours, Anna. Friday, 16 June 1944. Dear Kitty, new problems. Mrs. Von Don is desperate. Talks about a bullet through her head, prison, hanging, and suicide. She's jealous that Pater confides in me and not her. She's offended that Dussel doesn't enter into her flirtations with him as she'd hoped. Afraid that her husband is smoking all the fur coat money away. She quarrels, uses abusive language, cries, pities herself, laughs, and then starts a fresh quarrel again. What on earth can one do with such a foolish, blubbering specimen? No one takes her seriously. She hasn't any character, and she grumbles to everyone. The worst of it is that it makes Pater rude, Mr. Von Don irritable, and Mummy cynical. Yes, it's a frightful situation. There's one golden rule to keep before you. Laugh about everything and don't bother yourself about the others. It sounds selfish, but it's honestly the only cure for anyone who has to seek consolation in himself. Crawler has received another call-up to go digging for 4 weeks. He's trying to get out of it with a doctor's certificate and a letter from the business. Coupuis wants to have an operation on his stomach. All private telephones were cut off at 11 o'clock yesterday. Yours, Anna. Friday, 23 June 1944. Dear Kitty, nothing special going on here. The English have begun their big attack on Cherbourg. According to Pym and Von Don, we're sure to be free by October 10. The Russians are taking part in the campaign, and yesterday began their offensive near Vitebsk. It's exactly 3 years to the day since the Germans attacked. We've hardly got any potatoes. From now on, we're going to count them out for each person. Then everyone knows what he's getting. Yours, Anna. Tuesday, 27 June 1944. Dearest Kitty, the mood has changed. Everything's going wonderfully. Cherbourg, Vitebsk, and Slobenfeld today. Lots of prisoners and booty. Now the English can land what they want. Now they've got a harbor. The whole Cotentin Peninsula, 3 weeks after the English invasion. A tremendous achievement. In the 3 weeks since D-Day, not a day has gone by without rain and gales, both here and in France. But a bit of bad luck didn't prevent the English and Americans from showing their enormous strength. And how. Certainly the wonder weapon is in full swing. But of what consequence are a few squibs apart from a bit of damage in England, and pages full of it in the Boche newspapers? For that matter, when they really realize in Bocheland that the Bolsheviks really are on the way, they'll get even more jittery. All German women not in military service are being evacuated to Groningen, Friesland, and Gelderland with their children. Mussert has announced that if they get as far as here with the invasion, he'll put on a uniform. Footnote. Mussert was the Dutch National Socialist leader. Does the old fatty want to do some fighting? He could have done so in Russia before now. Some time ago, Finland turned down a peace offer. Now the negotiations have just been broken off again. They'll be sorry for it later, the silly fools. How far do you think we'll be on July 27? Yours, Anna.
So we'll stop here for part 1 of the reading. It's a long section, so go ahead and take a break. We can answer what Anne misses most, and she misses being outside, and I would definitely miss that too. I will see you guys in the second part.